All right, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, perhaps, depending where you are in the world. My name's Kate. I'm calling in from Ngunnawal and Ngambri land in Canberra, Australia today, and welcome to our Pacific Wash webinar for the month of August. Today we've got a really interesting session about peri-urban areas and how Pacific water and wastewater utilities are trying to improve the water, sanitation and hygiene services that are provided to peri-urban areas. So we know that the Pacific is rapidly urbanizing, and this brings a lot of benefits, but it also brings many challenges, particularly when we're talking about safely managed service provision. And this is something that many countries are currently exploring and trying to work out what the best approach is to provide services to peri-urban areas. So we have a number of speakers today who will be talking about what they've been doing in peri-urban areas in Fiji and also in the Solomon Islands. So we'll be hearing from the utilities and also from several NGOs who work very closely with the utilities to improve these services. So would you all please kindly have a look at your screens to look at the house rules for today. As normal, please turn off your microphone unless you're speaking. If you'd like to say something, you can drop it in the chat. You can raise your hand to ask a question, or you can leave it to the end of the presentation also to ask questions. And if you could rename your account so that it says your name and your organization or who you're representing in brackets, that would be fantastic, because that really helps us get to know who everyone is. So today we will have, as I mentioned, presentations from both Fiji and the Solomon Islands. We have a real wealth of knowledge today from the different presenters. And hopefully at the end of that, we'll have a short Q&A session. But if you do have questions as we're going along, as I mentioned, please just drop them in the chat and we might be able to answer some of those during the relevant sessions as well. We do have a lot to get through today. In the next 1 hour and 15 minutes, hopefully we'll be able to get through everything. And if you have any concerns, questions, need to say anything during the webinar, you can message myself privately, or you can message Dean if you have any concerns that you'd like to raise anonymously also. So as you notice, this webinar is being recorded. All the webinars that the Pacific Wash webinar series hosts do go on the ADB website, so you can have a look, or you can share the materials after the event with your colleagues and acquaintances as well. We put up not just the recording, but also the materials, so the presentations from each of the presenters as well. So that's enough from me. I'll hand over to Leah Gutierrez, who's the Director General of the Pacific Division at ADB, to give us a warm welcome, please, Leah.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. So welcome to today's WASH webinar, which, as you know, is already, I would say, we're already beyond the 10th WASH web seminar, in fact. So this has been a very successful and long-running WASH webinar we have. So it's really great to have all of you today. I would like to acknowledge our CEO from PWWA, our colleagues from PWWA, colleagues from utilities, government agencies, development partners, and also my colleagues from ADB. It's really great to see all of you here today. Really, I would like to thank you for joining us to talk about the role and the possibilities for utilities to enable water, sanitation, and hygiene services for peri-urban communities. And I have two messages for you today. The first is change is happening fast and we need disruptive solutions. Now, having worked in development for over 2.5 decades, I'm struck by how fast the built environment and demographics are changing. Populations in and around cities continue to grow at a fast pace. The Pacific is experiencing not only very rapid urbanization, but also it is a region experiencing some of the most severe impacts of climate change. These impacts are occurring at an unprecedented scale, making vulnerable communities even more vulnerable. For those of you working in infrastructure, the traditional model of master planning and incrementally expanding pipe networks, in the case of water, sewerage, for example, will take too much time and too many resources to reach everyone, especially those in peri-urban areas. It does not mean that we should not plan for traditional infrastructure, but in fact, in parallel, we need disruptive solutions from business as usual. This is to reach the most vulnerable, to ensure that hygiene awareness goes hand in hand with water supply and sanitation to have the most effective outcomes. We need to be creative and innovative in thinking of technologies and service delivery models. We need to equip ourselves with the right human resources and skill. Next, message number 2. The second message that I want to convey is that leveraging partnerships is critical. Utilities working in partnership and building relationships with expanding informal communities is critical to making sure everyone, especially the most vulnerable, receives services. In most cases, many agencies are involved in WASH in peri-urban areas, and utilities can play an important coordinating role. They may also directly deliver WASH services, but they can also build their capacity to channel and direct the support of NGOs, development partners, and government agencies to help ensure the most sustainable and impactful solutions are being rolled out. In closing, I want to again recap my 2 key messages. First, as organizations, we need to assess whether we are learning fast, whether we are learning as fast as we can, so that we can not only sustain basic service provision, but also accelerate progress to meet the pace of change we face, reaching more people with WASH services. Second, partnerships matter, and utilities can and should leverage the resources of others to reach peri-urban communities. The webinar today is a good step in the direction of learning from each other. I'm looking forward to hearing from the speakers today about practical solutions, innovative approaches that are being tried, and lessons from them. We know that financial sustainability is a concern when expanding services, so I hope to learn about how this is addressed, since we need to confront it head-on and we need to find win-win solutions for utilities and communities. For communities, and for example, managing non-revenue water. I also hope that we can all ask ourselves tough questions and continue to challenge ourselves to think about whether we, as managers, are champions for improving WASH for peri-urban communities, and whether we fully understand the barriers so that we may better craft appropriate solutions and continuously evaluate them so we can do even better. So thank you again. I will stop here now, and with my best wishes for an engaging discussion today. So over to you, Kate.
Thank you so much, Leah. I wanted to encapsulate some of the points that you made that I thought was so excellent, but there were so many of them that I think I'll have difficulty doing so. I think your points are excellent and very on topic for what we're talking about today. And I really do think that this will be a very engaging discussion, like you say. So thank you very much for those words, Leah. Really appreciate it. And now we'd also like to hear from the CEO of the Pacific Water and Wastewater Association, Lucia Cefolao, who is PWWA are the co-presenters of this webinar series. So we'd love to hear from Lucia a bit about the peri-urban areas and how PWWA and its member utilities are dealing with this in the Pacific. So over to you, Lucia.
Thank you very much, Kate, and thank you very much, Leah, for those encouraging comments on this issue. Good morning and aloha everyone, once again to this webinar series. I would like first of all to say that we are very fortunate to be collaborating with ADB on these webinars. The sharing of knowledge and experiences have been very useful for utilities in the Pacific. And today, as Leah and Kate have spoken about, we discuss a topic that is rather difficult to deal with due to the many challenges of the issue, the topic of enabling wash services in the peri-urban areas of the Pacific. Most of our utilities in the Pacific are constrained by technical, financial, and legal barriers to serve peri-urban areas, when they also struggle to provide acceptable water supply services to existing customer bases. The data collected through our benchmarking survey of performance of utilities within their mandated areas provide evidence of this. And for most utilities, enabling wash services in the peri-urban areas under the current financial mandates and financial models are simply not feasible. Most are unable to cope with the pace of urban growth in formalized communities in the provision of water supply services. And so even more challenging as well is waste disposal and sanitation in general. So the challenges are far greater for extending that service beyond their mandates to settlements with insecure land tenure and those in urban areas that may be more remote or outside of formal utility service districts or other problems. And finding solutions to these services shortfall is not easy, but it is very much a growing problem that is rapidly growing and will not disappear. And we have been encouraging our utilities to look beyond their mandated areas and look at innovative ways of dealing with these issues and integrating services with communities and NGOs, so that there is some long-term concerted commitment to solving the issues, and also as a way to seek government assistance towards and commitment towards the areas that that are currently a real issue in especially the Melanesian countries. So I am particularly looking forward to hearing firsthand how some of our utilities are working in partnership with others, their communities and NGOs to improve and expand their service in WASH to peri-urban areas. I'm very much encouraged to be able to listen to them, and also encouraged by the comments made by Leah on how we can look at the way forward for some of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lucia. As always, extremely on point, explaining the situation in the Pacific. And I think both Leah and Lucia have some excellent self-reinforcing points there. Now, while we just wait for our friends from Water Authority of Fiji to get set up for the first presentation, if friends attending today don't mind, we might take a quick group photo, if that's okay. Hi, Vasiti. Thank you so much. We'll just take a quick group photo, if that's okay with everyone. If you wouldn't mind turning on your cameras, that would be absolutely fantastic. Oh, wow, look at everyone. Oh, Shinjini, you're beautiful in the Pacific there, looking gorgeous. Oh, it's so wonderful to see so many different faces here today. Okay, so I'll take a quick photo on 3, 2, 1. And then we have a second page also. Oh, look, I see Klumi and Carl and Maria and everyone on the second page now. So I'll take a photo of this group too in 3, 2, 1. Lovely. Thank you all so much for indulging our photographic tendencies. You know, we always love to have a good documentation of these events. So I'll just save them and then we will move on with the presentation. So let me share my screen again. So first up, we will be hearing from two of our friends in the Pacific. We will be hearing from Vasiti Sarabatu, who is one of the national consultants with the WASH TA through ADB, and also from, oops, admit, don't save, yeah. Sorry, also from Elisi Senekuta, who is the Community Engagement Officer at the Water Authority of Fiji. And they're going to talk about their community engagement activities that WAF are currently undertaking in Fiji. So over to you, Vasiti and Elisi.
Thank you, Kay. Bula to everyone who's logged in to connected to this webinar. I'm sorry we're not going to keep the video on just to help us with the our presentation, quality of our presentation. I'm Vasiti, and I'm extending a warm greeting to everybody across the Pacific and across the world as well. I see familiar names and I say hello to all of you. Before I continue with the presentation, I was a bit nervous when I saw us as number one. So thank you, Kate, for pushing us to be the first presenter. And we are happy, Alicia and I, we're happy to be the first to share with you how we are facilitating work here in Fiji. So if you don't mind, I'm going to close our video again and just continue with the speaker. Thank you. Okay, for the purpose of those of you who are attending this webinar for the first time, Fiji is one of the 14 countries that's lucky to be given this funding through ADB to enhance WASH practices and reach out to people in our community. And we are fortunate about that. I believe all of us have the same TA goals. The interventions in Fiji, I believe, will be quite different, and that is because of the situation as it is here in our country. For output one, WASH practices, to achieve WASH practices in households and public places, to have it improved, in Fiji we had proposed behavior change, hygiene promotion activities on WASH in household, communities, and in schools. To also improve WASH practices in households and public places, we had proposed initially that we install inclusive hand washing facilities in public areas. To achieve our two, looking at enabling environment, improved and sustainable hygiene, strengthened. Those are the 5 things we had suggested, and that is to establish and improve WASH sector coordination, water safety planning, business continuity planning through Water Authority, asset management and maintenance, safety measures for sanitation workers. This is a sort of a pathway for us initially, But before I move on to the next slide, I would like to let everybody know that right now, the focus for Fiji is trying to increase access to safe water and hygiene for people with disabilities in intermittent supply areas. So we're not just working with anybody in the community, we are focusing on people with disabilities living in intermittent supply areas. This approach was commonly discussed between Water Authority and the ministries responsible looking after the Water Authority customers. So the first thing we did last year was conducting a needs assessment survey. We wanted to find out what the situation as it is. So we went out, and this was a very challenging time in Fiji, because that was when COVID-19 was still scary. But we managed, with the support of Water Authority and the provincial council offices, we managed to get we managed to get 7 villages in Tailevu and Rio Province and 6 informal settlements sitting between Nosori and Silver Corridor. There were a total of 207 respondents, and those are the names of the communities that we had initially surveyed last year. So from our survey, these were the key highlights. We found out that all of them were connected to Water Authority, and all of them had or needed water at certain periods of time. And we also know that there is an existing structure in the villages, but this was lacking during the time of our survey. I'm happy to mention that we now have, through the work that we're doing with Water Authority, we now have the divisional advisory councillors who will be helping us when we move out into the informal settlements. And in each community, in the villages, they have existing communities, but they are inactive. In the informal settlements, if you work in Fiji, you know what it's like. So there are some people who know about water plumbing, some people who know about something, but there's no governance at community level. Thank you. Sorry, I'll just stay on that slide. So I would like you to remember this slide. In our proposed activities, we had proposed, after the research last year, rapid assessment research, that we're not just going to go to the community and install a tank and walk out after 9 months. We need to strengthen the roles and responsibilities of people at community level, with the people at district level and at national level, because that was also one of a greater challenge. The community, the village headmen, for example, they report quarterly, but the question they are asked to fill every quarter is the same. How many? List the names of the people in your water committee. This is asked every quarter. So if you are somebody working at that level, won't you be bored to see the same list of names? And what good does that have? I'm not criticizing the situation that we have here. I'm just saying that these are some of the gaps that we have identified that we can strengthen through this program. And we believe that once this governance system is strengthened, everybody knows their role, there's a good supporting support from government, there's a good supporting system, community level, grassroots people know their role, there will be some positive changes in our community. So I would like you to remember the people at grassroots level as tier 1. These are the people highlighted in orange. And tier 2, these are the leaders at community level. And tier 3, these are the people at district level. Because I'm going to refer to tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 later on in my presentation. Thank you, Kate. I'm fortunate to have my colleague, Alice Senikuta. I'll share how we came to work together in this office after she speaks. But I've asked her to share a bit of what we are doing, just so you can understand what Water Authority is already doing. Thank you. I now invite Alice.
Hello and Bula Vinaka. Thank you very much, Ms. Serwatu, for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Alice Senikuta, and I'm currently the Community Engagement Officer here at Water Authority that has been tasked to be working with Ms. Serwatu. And we are very fortunate to be given the opportunity to work with ADB through this venture in this particular program, specifically in looking at the most vulnerable in communities and addressing the issues of water sanitation and hygiene. So I'm just gonna switch off our camera again, just for the purpose of our presentation, while I'll explain on the works that we are currently doing. Just briefly on the works that the Water Authority is doing, we have two sets of customers, just a basis on how we work and how we do things. We have our metered customers. These are the ones that are connected to our reticulation system. And in the central division in Fiji, that is from the outskirts of Corvo town, which has their own reticulation system, and from Nosori to Subak. So all of these areas, whether it's a village or an informal settlement, they come under our metered customers, as long as they are connected to our reticulation system. Our other set of customers, these are the ones that we mostly focus our rainwater harvesting initiatives. These are the ones that are not connected to our system. Rather, they have their own water sources. This we refer to as our rural communities or our rural customers. So this is just a brief on the differentiation of the areas that the authority reaches out the services.
Just continue.
So basically, one of our major works in addressing the wash issues and ensuring that our most vulnerable have access to water, one of the programs that we are currently doing is the rainwater harvesting tank initiatives. And the current initiative has been ongoing since 2016 up until to date. And so far, we have been delivering tanks to the most vulnerable. The communities are picked based on their geographical location, the status on how they receive water. So particularly areas that are highly dependent on rainwater, they do not have access to any other source of waters. They don't have a creek to source water from, nor do they have access for a well, nor a borehole. So these areas are the areas that have been targeted to have access to rainwater tanks. And the process of these communities or people to have access to rainwater tanks, the initiative is fully government funded. The only thing that the community has to provide are the tank bases, construct their tank base, and install their guttering. The tanks and the delivery of the tanks to their areas is specifically funded by the government. And this is implemented by the Water Authority of Fiji. And just recently, we have also focused this particular program to intermediate supply areas. Now, when we're saying intermediate supply areas, these are communities that are connected to WEF's reticulation system, but they have only access to water maximum 2 to 3 hours in a day, or probably 3 hours in the morning and another 3 to 4 hours in the evening. These are highlighted as our intermediate supply areas. So these areas or customers living within these areas are also eligible to applying for this initiative. Another program that we are also working on, and this particular program focuses to our rural communities. Now, rural communities, like I've mentioned earlier, these communities have their own water sources. They do not have access to WEF's reticulation system, and this is where we provide a water cutting system. There's also a process to this, which requires people residing in the areas on a particular schedule. They'd have to call in our toll-free line, which is 1507, to register their request. And then we will be advising the customers on their scheduled date. So we have 2 sections of scheduled dates, which are divided into weeks, as per highlighted on our slide. And all of these communities that we've seen or that we have targeted for our water cutting services, these areas are highly dependent on rainwater. They have no other water source to supplement their water need. So in order to help them to have access to water, we are cutting water to them on a fortnightly basis, whereby we are providing these customers 2,000 liters per household for a period of 2 weeks. And the 2,000 liters of water that is provided to each household, this is specifically for cooking and drinking and for hygiene purposes. Like I've mentioned earlier, water cutting services is just to supplement their current water need. So these particular areas that we have scheduled, they have, because of their current water issues, they are very vigilant, or they are accustomed to water conservation practices, because this is something this is an issue that they have that has become a norm to them over the years. So the water cutting services supplementing their need is a benefit to these communities. And this benefit is also going into our intermediate supply areas as well. In terms of our community outreach programs, there is a vast areas where we are providing our community engagement programs in. One is through community consultations or community awareness that we attend to. Either it's from invitation from communities, or invitations from other government stakeholders that we combine with and go out together to communities to provide awareness on WEF services, on the current services that we're providing, sharing information on water conservation practices, sharing queries, answering inquiries from customers, whether it's from our metered customers or it's from our rural customers. So we have various information to share out. For instance, for our metered customers, we also, we usually gear up to answer questions based on their billing inquiries, on our initiatives, rather it's water allowances, free water allowance initiative, various initiatives provided by the Water Authority of Fiji, or for our rural communities, it would be either on the Rainwater Initiative program, roles and responsibilities of water committees, and sharing information on the rural water and sanitation policy. These are the various information that we take out to communities depending on which status that they belong to, either it's for our metered customers or our rural non-metered customers. We also engage into stakeholder meetings. This is during meetings with government stakeholders, NGOs that work in the wash sector, where we share programs or share the different works that each agency is working on, and share information on the best ways that we can collaborate in administering or in addressing issues on wash, specifically on water and sanitation. Those are the various types of community engagement programs that we currently engage in. Without further ado, I'll invite Ms. Vatu to continue with our presentation today. Vinaka.
Thank you, Alice. Okay, I saw a question that popped up. Can we pack all the questions to later, and let us just continue with our presentation for now. Okay, from the work that initial work that I talked about, and then the current activities that Water Authority is doing, we have been in discussion, and as a result, we agreed on a scope of work signed between ADP and Water Authority, and this allowed me to be working from the Water Authority community engagement team. Some of the real issues I've observed, there's a high leakage, unpaid bills, illegal connections in communities. But in our scope of work, we are expected to design and implement a joint campaign to improve wash conditions and service delivery in intermediate supply areas, build on the findings and recommendations of wash baseline survey, improve water service levels, contribute to and strengthen the resourcing of WEF's community engagement unit, demonstrate the value of service improvements for both communities and WEF. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so current activities. Number one, we are in the process of procurement of 46 rainwater tanks. Like I said, these are for people living with disabilities in 7 villages. You may hear it's a village. Please note that Alicia just mentioned, even though they are a village, but they sit in Water Authority's reticulation system. So this procurement is divided into 3 phases. For the first phase, we have a plan sorry, the messages are distracting. We have a plan to facilitate water governance, hygiene behavioral change training for community leaders. Get the community leaders to commit to support people living with disabilities in the installation of the base and guttering of the rainwater tanks. Design a safe bus plan for people with disabilities. Once that's been signed off in each village, 7 villages, then we will proceed to phase 2. Right now, we do not have photos, but this is something that's going to be coming up in our next presentation. Once that's completed, then we will be installing rainwater tanks to those 7 villages. Phase 3 is where we have water governance training and basic plumbing training for the water committee, and also help them to monitor and monitor the existing water system and report. One of the things that just came up last week Friday was the request from one of the provincial office asking us if in our water governance training, if we can also review the reporting template. So we are happy that this is coming up from them. Anyway, activity number 2 is the development of information education, the IEC materials. We, through our work, we know that our metered customers need to learn how to use their tap or manage it and how to read their water meter. So these are some of the information we're looking around, hoping that this can be developed and dispersed or shared during outreaches. They also need to know where does the water come from. They need to understand that in an intermittent supply area, it's not about water authority, it's about the system that's not catering for the population. So these are some of the information we're trying to educate people. We're also thinking of planning actually to get them to understand how to connect sewer system and how to use the sewer system properly. Operation and maintenance of water systems, and I believe this helps answer one of the questions that popped up. This is how we're going to be educating them about first wash and how they can operate and maintain the tanks at community level for people living with disabilities. Point 3, while we're going through that, we will be working and support people at tier level 1 in Rawa and Televu with any government programs and distribution of water storage buckets and washing soap for people living with disabilities in informal settlements. Thank you. Next slide, please. Nakabakalevu. I'm sorry, I rushed a bit. But if you have questions, do we have a lot of time for questions, Kate? Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vasiti and Elise, for your very comprehensive presentation. We might just leave questions to the end, if that's okay, if you can stick around, as we do have a number of speakers to get through to today. So thank you again so much for your presentation, Vasiti and Elise. It was really fascinating to hear what WAF is doing in community engagement in peri-urban areas. So now we are going to hear from Georgina Ho, who is a staff member at Solomon Water in the Solomon Islands, who's going to briefly give us a bit of information about what Solomon Water is doing on hygiene promotion in the Solomons. So Georgina, over to you.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to Water Authority of Fiji for the good presentation, and we also want to say thank you for inviting us, Solomon Water, and our WASH partner, Plan International, and Live and Learn to be part of this webinar today. So I will just do a quick scene introduction, and then the other members will be followed later with their other presentation as well. So the first slide there is about Solomon Water, who we are and what we do, and I will give you some overview of the WASH program that we are currently working on. So about Solomon Water, like the vision is safe water for a healthy nation, and the mission is to provide reliable and safe water supply and sewage services within our area of operations in Solomon Islands, while working in partnership with the community as well to plan, deliver, and operate infrastructure in a manner that seeks to minimize the social and environmental impacts of our activities. And Solomon Water is a state-owned enterprise It is established in 1992 by the government, and especially to provide water and wastewater services. Currently, Solomon Water operates in Honiara and 3 other provincial centers, Auki, Noro, and Tulagi, and also Gizo. So that's where we are operating now. Currently, we also have 15,000 plus domestic and commercial customers. So this is briefly about Solomon Water. Next. For the WASH project, we have 2. So the first one is the hygiene promotion project, which is under the UWSSP, and this is where we collaborate together with Plan International and Live and Learn to implement the project within Honiara in 6 settlements around Honiara. So this is the first project, and the second one is the water supply and sanitation for vulnerable communities, where it is also operating in Honiara and also the 4 provincial centers. So that's the 2 WASH projects that we are currently working on. So for the hygiene promotion project, the expected outcome is to improve WASH status of urban residents of Solomon Islands, and also to prove and have a scalable model for engaging residents of informal settlements that results in improved WASH status. So that's the expected outcome of the hygiene promotion project. And under the outcomes, you can see it has 4 components. So the first one is water for all, and the second component is improved sanitation. The third component is hygiene awareness and education, and the 4th component is the WASH in school. So under each component, it has component outcomes. So like for water for all component, the outcome is for all households in selected informal settlements to have access to Solomon water, and also we want them to pay for the water bills. So like that's the outcome for the first component. And for the improved sanitation component, we want all households in selected informal settlements to have a toilet that is effective barrier to the transmission of disease. And for the third components, residents have an improved level of key WASH related hygiene knowledge and behavior. And for the last component is to improve WASH facilities and hygiene behavior in the selected schools. So like, as I say, like we cannot do all this work by ourselves, but Live and Learn and Plan International is working very hard with Solomon Water in the communities to achieve these outcomes. So, yeah, so, and for the third and 4th component, we are still waiting on the grants, the funding to be available towards the end of the year, and then we should start work on the WASH in school project. And for the second project, water supply and sanitation for vulnerable communities, you can see that it has 4 components there as well. The first one is water availability. Second, vulnerable households water supply. And also component 3 is city sanitation improvements. Component 4 is the provincial WASH improvements, where we are working with the provincial centers, the Ministry of Health in the provinces, and also the churches, schools, and also to implement this component. And on the other side is the goal of the program. Urban communities in Solomon Islands are less vulnerable because they have improved water security and improved hygiene knowledge and practices. And the other goal is for Solomon Water is more sustainable due to increased customer base and improved customer relations. So that's the two overall goal of the program. Next one. Oh, thank you, Tomas. Yeah, any question, you can just put it in the chat box and yeah, we'll come back later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Georgina, and all our friends at Solomon Water for that introduction. As Georgina noted, Solomon Water is working very closely with Live and Learn and also Plan International. So we're going to hear from them now. We're going to hear from Michelle Abel, who is with Live and Learn Environmental Education, who's going to talk about the hygiene behaviour change activities in the Solomon Islands. So over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Kate. And I know we're running a little bit behind schedule, so I will go quickly, which will be to warn you that there will be slides with lots of detail on them, but they're all available later so that you can read them in your own leisure, and then you can look up different things and that sort of thing. I also have to apologise that my colleague Eric Hale has been knocked out with influenza in Honiara, so he's unable to join us today. So we're working with Solomon Water and I'm just trying to find out why my slides aren't changing. There we go. We're working with Solomon's Water and Plan International on the behaviour change part for the hygiene project that Gina just introduced. And the model that we are basing our hygiene behaviour work on is the behaviour change wheel. And I will briefly show you how the wheel works, but it's a framework that brings together a whole lot of international theories, because there's so many behaviour change framework theories, into one kind of model where you can look at different ideas and try different things. So I'm sorry, I'm controlling the slides. So I sometimes double click because I'm controlling Kate's computer, I think. The middle of the wheel is based on capability, motivation, and opportunity. So these are different components of how we make decisions and how we decide to do things. And so there's in the work that we're doing with designing the campaigns, we want to make sure that we address these different things. I'm not going to go into detail on them because it would take up the rest of our time, but this slide is a good one to read later. Our process is that we have a focus situation, which for us is our hand washing and also for improved sanitation, so purchasing a toilet. We do all the activities you would expect to do, focus group surveys, baseline, that kind of thing. Then we feed all that information into the behaviour change wheel process. And then we have the red section is a behaviour change intervention, and the grey thing is where we talk about the supporting environment. And this is where our partnership with Solomon's Water is our supporting environment, and the behaviour change intervention are the activities that we do in the communities themselves. So this is the process that we use for all of the behaviours that we want to address. This slide just shows you briefly that the red ring are different types of behaviour theories. So we have persuasion, education, modelling, enablement, training, coercion, those sorts of things. And then on the grey ring, we have the supporting environment types of interventions you can have, which can be legislation, service provision, such as what Solomon Water does, regulations, which is what the government does about the types of toilets you can have in the urban settlements, guidelines, social planning, marketing. So this is why it's a good model, because you can work and link. And in the actual I need to declare who the model is, and I'll put a link in. It's by Susan Mitchie, Lou Aitkins, and Robert West. And it's the Behaviour Change Wheel, a guide to designing interventions. And I'll put a link into the chat later. They've got some amazing tables that show you like little matrices that show you if you want to influence this kind of thinking, then you should do persuasion and physical measures, that kind of thing. So it's a really good tool that's practical. We also used another tool, the behaviour barrier analysis. And that one uses just 14 questions to cover 12 different behaviour determinants. And when we do the surveys, we set a behaviour statement, which may be, do they wash their hands after going to the toilet or before cooking or not? And their answers identify them as a doer or a non-doer of the behaviour. There's no stigma. They don't know that they've been labelled. It's just our survey tool just identifies them. And then this enables us to find really localised enabling factors or barriers for the behaviour. behaviour. So we did this in the 6 target settlements with about 120 participants, and got some amazingly deep findings, which I'll come to in a moment near the end. The behaviour change wheel we use has 6 steps in it, which is a little bit refined from the academic process in the book, but we found through our experimentation that we needed to refine some of the steps just because of how things work. So we understand the behaviour context. We then do what we all call a COM-B assessment, which is the capability, opportunity and motivation. This helps us define a target behaviour. So every target behaviour has a statement for it, and the one we're working on at the moment is related to hand washing. And then we plan out our interventions. So we don't jump straight into just doing interventions. We do all this step beforehand. And that's been interesting, working with the local teams on saying, slow down, slow down. We might all have great ideas. We might all have good ideas for some kind of radio spots, that kind of thing. But we need to anchor all our interventions into the actual behaviour understanding that we've developed. And then we identify policy or government support. This is a good slide to come back and look at with the recording. Because this is a summary of our COM-B analysis, where we went through all of the surveys, and then we developed a behaviour statement just for the hand washing. We would develop a behaviour statement for every target campaign. So we will develop a behaviour statement for the sanitation component when that's ready, and we'll develop behaviour statements for every. So basically it's who does what to where and when, so that we can then link our interventions to all of that. So after doing all of this work, which was several months' work, I'm just trying to click through, settled on 3 interventions that were developed into campaign materials. So intervention 1 was addressing psychological capability, and it was education, which is reference materials like posters, stickers, videos. Intervention 2 is environment and modelling, a social opportunity. So we looked at identifying influences, who's going to influence the behaviour that we're looking for. And then the third intervention is persuasion, which is how do we influence people, not necessarily consciously. It could be just their reflective motivation, or that they would feel positive about doing the behaviour, which is always washing their hands with soap. So then we got to do the fun stuff of developing the campaign materials. The model has a framework for assessing the viability of each intervention. And that's called APPEASE, which is affordability, practicability, effectiveness, acceptability, side effects, equality. It's just a good way to just sense check what you're doing, because you can come up with so many different ideas, but you need to decide in some way what's actually worth doing. And I click and nothing happens, so I'll click again. Whoops, here we go. All right, this is something that I wanted to just pause on and not go as fast with, was some of the messaging that came through with the barrier analysis. So our doers and non-doers all said that water and soap is key, and we know that access is really key. But our non-doers said that they often forgot to do it. So they said someone to remind them at critical times. The doers said that they had already developed habits or cues for hand washing, but the non-doers said they didn't have a strong cues and they would forget. So that was something that was really good for us to know about why people weren't doing it. It wasn't they were anti the practice, they would forget. Hygiene knowledge is not a gap that needs to be identified. The non-doers were very clear about the consequences of not washing their hands with soap. So we knew that hygiene it's okay to include it, but it shouldn't be the key focus of what we're talking about in the campaigns. And the most important influences identified across all doers and non-doers was their immediate family members, followed by their church and community leaders. So that was useful for us to know who has influence on doing the reminding, who should be doing the reminding. We were also able to dig down into each of the 6 target areas and find nuanced messages. One of the interesting things that came out was that the type of soap that you use, some people are just using whatever soap they want to, and it burns their hands, their skin's peeling, their skin's getting damaged by the soap. So it's clearly not hand washing soap. So we're able to, and that was different in some of the 6 settlements. It was a bigger problem than in others. And in another settlement, one of the links that they put together was that their hands would get cold in cold water, and they linked that to getting pneumonia. So we thought, okay, so this is health knowledge, but it's health knowledge that's a little bit incorrect in that pneumonia doesn't come from cold hands. Pneumonia comes from, it's like COVID, it can be viral or bacterial. So we learned a lot through doing these discussions. Now I'm going to just give you a quick overview of some of the campaign materials we actually developed. We were held up due to some civil unrest in Solomons at the time, and then also a COVID outbreak itself. So we adapted to doing some of these earlier presentations before we could launch into the actual hand washing campaign proper, which we've just done in July. So we did a social media one at Christmas, which cost us 353 Australian dollars to do paid promotions, but we were astonished by the number of impressions that we got. It just shows how many people in Honiara are hanging out on Facebook. And the messages we took, again, were positive, not necessarily health education. Obviously, it's about washing your hands, but spread peace, not germs, and don't take sickness home with you at Christmas when everybody leaves. So I'm just checking if I can change the slide again. Good. All right. And then we did a COVID campaign when everyone was in lockdown. This one was much more, again, it was just social media, very, very affordable way. We got a lot of exposure. It linked in with what the government was doing. And it was much more practical, this one, because we wanted people to share information. We did do a little bit about stigma and not, there was some problems with fear in Honiara, but we mainly focused on, and we did a big billboard that was mainly focused on information for this one. And then we started on our, what I call the campaign proper, which is what the contract was for, which was for the hand washing to support the wider ADB Solomons Water program. And so we have launched that now. When I prepared this presentation last week, we'd only launched it in one of the communities, but I think we've now launched it in all 6, and Gina is and the team sitting in Honiara have been part of that, so they can talk more about the launch. This is one of the billboards that we have up, and this one is in Soul's Pigeon, but it's it just says it's good for when you want to share food that you should have clean and fresh hands. And the clean and fresh links in with a wider ADB behaviour change message that's happening as well about feeling clean and fresh. But then in the little bubble there, you've got, Daddy, are you washing your hands too? So that's a subtle way to say, hey, families need to remind others to wash their hands. And one of the findings we had that was men needed more reminding than women. That came out of the barrier analysis. There was more male non-doers than doers. And I'll just show you a few of the other materials we have up at the moment. They've only gone up in the last few weeks, so we haven't got any data yet about, message recall and that kind of thing. But the one on the right is talking about when the soap burns your hands, you should use soap that the health recommends for washing your hands, not laundry soap, because that's a big thing that is coming back through all the surveys. People want to wash their hands, but their skin peels. And then this is some of the social media materials. These ones are in English because we haven't, we'll be doing the social media one again very soon. So we'll translate the slogans. But again, it's focusing more on that, what we found. Don't use cheap laundry soap to wash your hands, and then remind each other. And I think, oh yes, and just to finish off, this is some of the pictures from the community launches. They've all, if Eric was here, he would be telling us about how the community launches went, but maybe Gina or the others in the Q&A can answer if anyone's got questions about the actual things happening on the ground. And I apologise for racing so much, but we were behind time. So thank you for listening. And I will hand over control again. There we go, Kate, all back to you.
Technology. Thank you so much, Michelle, for that really interesting presentation, and particularly with regards to the findings about laundry soap. That is a really interesting finding, and I think really emphasizes the point of, like you say, not just launching into the campaigns, but doing a lot of this background research first, because there may be some things that we're actually not aware of yet. So that was really fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing, Michelle. And now we're going to hear from two of our friends at Plan International, my mistake, sorry, who are also working very closely with Solomon Water. We'll be hearing from Tom and Brian about the sanitation technical designs and the hygiene promotion that they are undertaking. So over to you.
Tom, can you start us off?
Thanks, Kate, and hi, everyone. As Michelle and Kate mentioned, Plan and Live and Learn are working in partnership on this project with Solomon Water. And as much as it's a hygiene promotion project and contract, there's two components, and Michelle's just spoken to one. The other component focuses on improving household sanitation in the peri-urban settlements. And to do that, we've gone through a process similar to what Pasiti described in Fiji, of working with communities, conducting assessments through a lot of household surveys. We've then engaged with some technical experts as well as community members to do a human-centered design workshop, conducted some feedback sessions through focus groups on those designs, and also then worked to refine them, and we're now heading through the last chapter. So Brian, my colleague there, Plan Solomon Islands, is going to speak to those things, and then I'll come back and wrap up with what the next activities are. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Tom. Next slide, please. Sorry. This data that you saw here is based on a survey that conducted by Solomon Water through SINU and Plan International and Live and Learn, where we found that that a great number of households have own household toilets, with more than half of the numbers of the toilet were, water-based toilets. However, it seems that around 50% or half of the toilets appeared operational. Thank you. Next slide. Information from the assessment sanitation sector assessment that were conducted was used to form these three market segments here. According to the assessment statistics, all the households within these three market segments have the aspiration to own a better toilet. However, the households within the upgrade and the investing market segments are the one we want to focus more on here, to move them further up, thus improve the household sanitation within the peri-urban communities. Thank you. Next. This slide here, it's highlight the estimated cost related to the sanitation types on each of the stages here. As you can see, the first and second stage, according to the communities, it cost less than 10,000 SBD, the Solomon dollars. And the toilet types within the third stage there, it's cost them around 10,000. The toilet types in the upper stage is the one which really pricey for them, which most of the households with low income, they see these toilets as a challenge for them to have. Thank you. As Tom introduced, we've conducted a human centered design workshop where it was attended by diverse participants. The design session of the workshop was started with we set up some technical parameters, design technical parameters, where the technical design parameters mostly around inclusiveness, desirability, durability of the construction material, safety and affordability of the toilet design options. Thank you. Yeah, also, we did constructed 4 superstructure prototypes, as you can see here in this slide. These were the 4 superstructures that we did, which to them it's more ideal for the communities. Thank you. Yeah, also during the workshop, we did, the participants did sketch some proposed sanitary storage and drain design options. Also, during the designing phase, the problems within the communities, especially regarding high water table and slow absorption rate, which sometimes can cause soak pit problems, were considered during the designing of the soak pit and the storage, the drain designs. Also, after the human-centered design workshop, we did a community feedback where the participants from the communities, apart from those that have built the superstructures, have come and give their feedback regarding each of the prototypes here. Most of their feedbacks are based on durability of the materials. They want more durable materials. And also, according to them, they want water-based toilets more than the dry pit and composting toilets. And according to them, they have the desire to pay for building the toilet. For their toilets. However, they have challenges with finance. There's these opt them to go for sourcing their own construction materials, regarding sanitation, and also they prefer to construct the toilets by themselves to reduce the total cost of the sanitation construction. Yeah, thank you. Back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Brian. So some of the challenges that we've come across in going through this process and refining these designs relate to the management of wastewater, which obviously the part of the toilet that no one really sees and concentrates on often. And particularly where in around Honiara and settlements we're working with where there's particularly high clay content and therefore not great percolation of wastewater. So that's exacerbated by a strong preference within the communities for water-based toilets and also a preference from the City Council for water-based toilets to avoid smell nuisance. So we're also working on the details of how we deal with that and then how that couples with the loan scheme, which we've helped and collaborated with Solomon Water on devising how a loan scheme can help to make toilets more affordable. So we've got ongoing work to refine the wastewater management systems, talking about leach fields and septic tank designs and absorption trenches, etc. How we manage that, particularly in the clay soils, as I mentioned. Then developing up some packages that can be marketed through the loan scheme, which is going to be available to Solomon Water customers, and Ken's going to speak to that in a minute. We're then planning to engage private sector plumbers and hardware stores to offer these services to help households install and construct the designs, and then practical training also for households with those plumbers, as we know that a lot of households will jump straight to doing DIY, do-it-yourself construction. And the hygiene campaign that Michelle spoke to will have a sanitation campaign linked to that to help try and shift and motivate behaviour change towards better sanitation. And then we'll also do some marketing of the technical options that we produce. Thank you. I'll pass over to Ken.
Thanks, Tom. Have I got control of the slide? I think I have. Okay. Thanks, everyone. So I'll just talk briefly on the loan scheme component of the wash work that we're doing. The purpose of the loan scheme is specifically for sanitation and hygiene improvement. So it can include hand washing components of toilets. And we're starting by focusing on the 6 settlements that are part of our WASH program with Plan and Live and Learn. Obviously, we have a deep engagement in those 6 settlements, so it's a good place to start. Who's eligible? Well, it's for existing Solomon Water customers. An existing customer is someone who's been with us for at least 6 months and has a fully paid up account in terms of their water bills, but also new customers. So people who've been with us for less than 6 months, provided that they've shown that they can pay their monthly water bill, so they've paid for 3 months, plus we'll ask them to effectively enter into a savings scheme. So the first 3 months of their water bills will include a small savings scheme component, just to ensure ourselves and themselves that the loan is affordable. We don't want to end up making people more indebted and causing sort of more problems than we're hoping to solve. As Tom was saying, the designs that will be available through the scheme are designs that we're currently working on. Plan are working on developing a sanitation manual that will give all the details of appropriate toilets for settlements, specifically in Honiara. And there'll be different technologies, there'll be different prices, and people can obviously choose the things that are most appropriate for them. Also part of the what, how will we do this? Well, we're talking with local hardware stores, and I'm sure Tom and the team can talk a bit more about that later if we want to, about them becoming partners in this process. And certainly there's a few who are keen to do this. So that would mean that they would be preparing packages of materials, keeping them stored at their warehouses and so on, and having those available. So they'd become sanitation business partners, if you like. Just very quickly, we can do a range of different loans, and all of this is still debatable really until we finish the sanitation manual as to what sort of costs the toilets that we recommend will come in at. But we'd like there to be a range of products, and we don't even forget the humble VIP. You know, if they're built properly, they're relatively cheap, they're quite easy to operate, and they're a good technology if you don't have anything at the moment. And then various packages going up, if you like, the sanitation ladder through pour flush toilets and flushing toilets. And it's very clear from all of the surveys that we've done that people are very keen on really having flushing toilets. They're making it very clear that they want to, if you like, skip some rungs on the ladder and go straight to flushing toilets. And that's great. Just in terms of the structures of the loans, they'll be over 24 months. There's no interest at this point. There's no fees to be charged, and any interest on late payments will be per standard Solomon Water payment terms, and those generally very seldom would involve interest. We tend to look at organising payment schemes to help people who are having problems rather than looking at charging interest. So a quick existing customer, for instance, who has a current water bill of $300 Solomon per month, if they chose to take $3,000 over 24 months, their loan repayment would be $125 per month. So their monthly bill for that 24-month period would go to $425 as Solomon dollars. Slightly different for a new customer. If their conditions were very similar, so they had a bill of 300 for the first few months that they've been with us, so to speak, and they wanted to borrow the 3,000, they're effectively going to borrow that over 27 months. Because we're going to enforce the 3-month saving period, that means that their loan ultimately will be over 27 months, which means they'll have a monthly payment of 111, making their monthly bill 411. So you can see very similar, whether you're a new customer or an existing customer, but obviously with new customers, we do need to try and make sure that everything is affordable for them. And then just in summary, I guess to sort of how this all sort of fits together, the basic premise really for all of the work we're currently doing, and both of our two main projects are really quite similar, but the basic premise is to actually view settlement households as valuable customers. I know we talk a lot about helping vulnerable communities and vulnerable households, and obviously that's certainly very much a part of the WASH programs that we're doing. But philosophically, we're changing that attitude and we're viewing settlement households as valuable customers. And that tends to change the way that you engage with them. We've, in the last 15 months, we've put in 2,570 connections to households in settlements. So we're really pushing connections into settlements. That's included 66 kilometers of pipeline. And all of that has mostly been funded by DFAT, ADB funding a lot of the raw water improvements, DFAT funding household connections. And then, as you've just heard, we've got the hygiene promotion campaign that's focused on hand washing and using effective toilets, whilst at the same time, we've got the sanitation work going on that is researching and designing appropriate toilet options. All of those sort of sanitation options to be delivered, if you like, through leveraging existing partners, so hardware stores within town, as well as training plumbers and community craftsmen, and then ultimately giving these interest-free loans. So what we're trying to show here, all of this work effectively, we're piloting. We're trying to prove a concept. So particularly with the loans, if we can show that the loans are mostly successful and we can share those stories of some of those households, that allows us to get more funding and ultimately to give more loans. And ultimately the impact of all of our WASH work is about improving the health status for all of Honiara residents, not just people living in settlements. So I better leave it there and I'll hand back over to you, Kate.
Thank you so much, Ken and Brian and Tom, for sharing that really fascinating summary of the work that Solomon Water and Plan International are currently doing in Honiara. It sounds like you've already had some very impressive achievements, and I wish you all the best with the continuation of the program. So we have run 10 minutes over time, but if people are willing to stay just maybe 5 minutes, we could have a couple of questions. Would anyone like to ask anything briefly? And raise your hand or just open your microphone.
Vasiti and Alisi, we are good.
Thank you, Vasiti and Alisi. Thank you again for your presentation too. Anyone else?
Good afternoon from Fiji, Kate. Just a question. Most of the works that is done by a number of agencies, including ADB, in the water sector and wastewater sector is commendable. Is there a possibility that the works that are done with communities and various parts of Pacific Islands, including Fiji, if it can be coordinated with the water and wastewater representation of that nation, because then it'll once projects are done by NGOs, then someone needs to sustain them. And in Water Authority, we find such projects done, very good projects. Then after a few years, they go back to square one. So just a suggestion on my side. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Seymour. I think everyone at ADB also completely agrees, and ADB is working more consistently with NGOs now as well. And we can see from this sort of cooperation that's happening in the Solomon Islands that NGOs and the water and wastewater utilities are also working more closely together, because, as you say, sustainability is a problem. Once a project finishes, it can become a bit of a challenge. So I think everyone is very much in line with your thinking, and hopefully that is the path that we can all take moving forward through the ADB program throughout the Pacific. All right, if there are no other questions or comments, as always, our recordings and all the materials will be available online. If you forget the link to the website, you can just Google ADB Pacific WASH webinars, and that will take you to ADB's knowledge portal where all the information will be stored. That's also where we announce future webinars, which we tend to hold once every couple of months. And you can pay attention to that to see what we'll be talking about next time. So thank you so much again, everyone, for attending today. Thank you to all our speakers and the excellent presentations, and you'll be able to review them again on the website. So until next time, thank you very much. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Bye.
Great, thanks, Asiti. That was really good.
Thanks, Elise.
Excellent.
That was great. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks,
Bye.
Georgina.
Thanks, team.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys. See ya. Bye.
Yeah, good on
Thank
you.
you,
Thanks,
Ken.
Ken.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye.